She's done waiting, done hoping he'll choose the connection, done holding space for someone who won't step into alignment. And when the divine feminine reaches this point, this decision, this inner surrender, the entire dynamic shifts. The divine masculine feels it. The energy that once held him, supported him, called to him, is gone. And in that absence, he's left with nothing but his own truth, his own shadows, his own choices. Because when she's done, it's not the end of love. It's the beginning of liberation. For both of them. Comment, "I'm done waiting," if you felt this shift in your own journey. Your truth might resonate with others. What happens when the divine feminine is done? It doesn't happen overnight. The divine feminine has given her all. She's loved unconditionally. She's held the connection through silence, distance, uncertainty. She's faced her own fears, her own wounds, her own shadows, hoping that he would do the same. But there comes a moment when she feels the shift. A quiet knowing, a realization that holding space is no longer serving either of them. Have you ever felt that moment? When the waiting isn't patience anymore, it's self-sacrifice. When the love isn't flowing, it's draining. That's when the divine feminine is done. It's not a dramatic exit, not a storm of anger or blame. It's a silent closing of a door that was once wide open. Not to punish, not to control, but to liberate. Because being done isn't about rejecting the divine masculine. It's about choosing herself, about reclaiming her energy, her truth, her peace, about saying, "I can't keep pouring into a space that won't meet me halfway." When the divine feminine reaches this point, everything changes. The energy she once extended, the anchoring presence, the unconditional love, the silent prayers withdraws, not out of resentment, but out of necessity, out of respect for herself, out of the deep understanding that true union can only happen between equals. That love isn't about waiting forever. It's about aligning with truth. Have you ever noticed how the divine feminine's decision to be done feels like a weight lifting, like a breath finally being released? This shift is powerful because it's internal. It doesn't rely on his response, his actions, his words. It's a choice she makes for herself, regardless of what he does next. And that's what makes it so transformative. Suddenly, the energy dynamic between them shifts. The divine masculine, who may have felt the safety of her consistent presence, the assurance of her love, senses the withdrawal. The space she once held begins to dissolve. The energetic net that caught him every time he fell is no longer there, and in that space, he's left with himself, with his own fears, his own wounds, his own choices. This isn't an act of abandonment, it's an act of sovereignty, a declaration that love must be met with love, truth with truth, effort with effort. That she will no longer wait in silence for him to be ready, that she will walk forward, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Have you ever felt the power of choosing yourself, not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself more? This is what happens when the divine feminine is done. She becomes magnetic, not by chasing, but by standing still. By being so rooted in her own energy that she no longer needs to hold space for someone who isn't ready to meet her there. She doesn't close her heart, she expands it. She doesn't stop believing in love. She stops waiting for it to come from one source. And this shift echoes through the connection, because when she's done, the dynamic isn't about pushing or pulling anymore. It's about aligning, and the divine masculine feels it, not as rejection, but as the absence of an energy he may have taken for granted. When the divine feminine is done, a shift ripples through the connection that can't be ignored. For the divine masculine, the change is subtle at first, an emptiness where her energy used to be, a space once filled with unconditional love, silent support, and quiet presence now feels different, lighter yet heavier, clearer yet more confronting. Because with her withdrawal, the energetic net he relied on to soften his fall is no longer there. Have you ever felt the difference between love that holds and love that releases? Between presence that comforts and absence that awakens? For the divine masculine, this isn't just about her physical absence or reduced communication. It's about the energetic field she once held, a field that anchored him even in his confusion, even in his fear. When she steps back, that field dissipates, leaving him to face himself. At first, he might feel relief. The pressure is gone. The silent expectations, the gentle nudges, the pull toward growth, all of it fades into quiet. But that quiet isn't peace, it's space. Space where his own shadows rise. Space where the illusions he clung to begin to crumble. Because her energy wasn't just an external comfort, it was a mirror, a reflection of what he was avoiding in himself. Have you noticed how, when someone stops holding space for another, it forces that person to finally look inward? Without her anchoring presence, the divine masculine begins to feel the weight of his own patterns. The avoidance he once masked as not ready. The distractions he once used to silence the call. The excuses he once believed were valid reasons to keep running. Her withdrawal doesn't create these realizations. It reveals them. It exposes the void he tried to fill with distractions. The void that only alignment with his own truth can heal. And this can be disorienting because for so long, her presence made the journey easier to ignore. He could feel her energy, her silent prayers, her unwavering belief in the connection, even when he wasn't ready to reciprocate. But now, with her done energy, the safety net is gone, and he's left standing alone, faced with his own resistance. Have you ever felt that the silence from someone you love isn't indifference, but an invitation to finally grow? This is the impact of her decision. It's not about punishing him. It's not about making him chase her. It's about creating the space where he has no choice but to confront himself, to stop looking outward for comfort and start looking inward for healing. The energetic shift she creates isn't rejection, it's redirection. It forces him to feel the weight of his own fears, to sit in the discomfort of his own avoidance, to recognize that the love he pushed away wasn't suffocating him, it was inviting him to expand. And in this space, a question emerges. Who am I without her holding space for me? For the divine masculine, this can be both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because the familiar comfort is gone. Liberating because it's in this space that he can finally begin to meet himself, to hear his own soul's call, to recognize that the connection wasn't just about her, it was about who he's being called to become. Why surrender changes the dynamic. The moment the divine feminine chooses surrender, the entire dynamic of the twin flame journey shifts. It's not the kind of surrender that means giving up or walking away in bitterness. It's the surrender that comes from deep clarity, the kind that whispers, I trust the journey, I release control. I no longer need to hold space for what must align itself. Have you ever felt the difference between clinging to an outcome and surrendering to the truth? For so long, the divine feminine may have held onto the connection. She may have waited, hoped, prayed, and anchored her energy to a vision of union. She did this not out of weakness, but out of love. A love that believed in potential. A love that saw beyond fear, beyond hesitation, beyond ego. But over time, this love began to weigh heavily, because no matter how much space she held, how much energy she offered, the connection didn't move forward. It spiraled. The dance of push and pull continued, and she realized, I cannot make this align. He has to choose to align himself. This realization is the seed of surrender. It's the moment when she chooses herself, not by cutting the connection, but by releasing the need to control it. By stepping back, not out of resentment, but out of wisdom. Have you noticed how, when you surrender, the energy between you and the other person changes? It becomes less charged, less desperate, more open, more spacious. The divine feminine surrender doesn't weaken the connection, it strengthens it, because it removes the energetic entanglement of chasing, fixing, waiting. It invites the divine masculine to meet her in alignment, not out of pressure, but out of choice. When she surrenders, she stops pouring her energy into trying to hold him in place. She stops feeding the dynamic of imbalance, where one gives and the other takes, where one leans in and the other leans away. Instead, she stands in her own light, her own truth, her own sovereignty. And this shift sends a clear, powerful signal to the divine masculine. This space is for those who align. I will not hold it for you anymore. Have you ever felt that by releasing your hold on something, you actually made space for it to come to you more naturally? The surrender of the divine feminine is not an abandonment of love. It's an honoring of love, a declaration that love must be reciprocal, balanced, and mutual. That true union can only happen when both are ready to meet as equals. It's not about chasing, it's about aligning. It's not about waiting, it's about being. And this shift changes everything for the divine masculine, because for the first time, he feels the space she created, not as comfort, but as emptiness, not as a net to catch him, but as an invitation to rise. Without her anchoring him, he has to find his own center. Without her holding the energy, he has to decide whether he's willing to do the inner work. Have you noticed how, when you stop chasing, others are forced to face their own truth? That's the power of surrender. It clears the field. It transforms the dynamic from one of imbalance to one of truth. It's not about manipulating outcomes or forcing change. It's about trusting the journey, trusting yourself, trusting the connection to evolve in its own time. And in that surrender, the divine feminine doesn't lose the connection. She reclaims herself. She becomes the embodiment of love in its purest form, free, expansive, whole. And it's from this place that true union can finally emerge, not from need, but from alignment, not from waiting, but from becoming. For so long, the divine masculine was held in a space of comfort, a space created by the divine feminine's unwavering energy, her silent prayers, her unconditional love, her willingness to hold space for his growth. But when she steps back, when she's done, something cracks open inside him. Have you ever seen someone only realize what they had when it's gone? Not because it disappeared, but because the energy that held them was no longer there. This is what happens when the divine feminine chooses herself. Her withdrawal of energy doesn't just leave him alone, it leaves him facing himself. The silence that once felt safe now feels hollow. The absence of her presence doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a loss. Not a loss of her, but a loss of the version of himself she allowed him to lean on. At first, he may resist, convince himself that he's fine, that this is just a phase. He might distract himself with other relationships, work, or surface-level interactions. But nothing fills the space she once held. Because her energy wasn't just love, it was a mirror that reflected his potential, his shadows, his truth. Have you noticed how, when someone's presence leaves, the echo of what they brought becomes louder? In her absence, the divine masculine is confronted with everything he avoided, the fears he denied, the wounds he buried, the parts of himself he refused to face. And with no one holding space for him, he has no choice but to sit with it, to feel it, to understand it. This is the catalyst for his awakening. It's not about punishment, it's about space. Space for his soul to rise, for his own truth to emerge, for him to realize that the connection wasn't about her fixing him, it was about him stepping into his own power. Have you ever felt that sometimes it's not until we're alone with our own shadows that we finally begin to heal? This awakening isn't immediate, it's gradual. It comes with waves of realization, moments of clarity that break through the resistance. Memories resurface of how he felt in her presence, of how her energy made him feel seen, accepted, challenged. And he begins to understand that the connection wasn't a burden, it was a gift. A gift that called him to grow, to evolve, to become the version of himself that could meet her in truth. He starts to feel the loss not as absence, but as a call, a pull toward something deeper, a recognition that the love he pushed away wasn't something external. It was a reflection of the love he hadn't yet found within himself. Have you noticed that real transformation often happens in the quiet moments of reflection? This is the divine masculine's turning point, the moment where he realizes that running, avoiding, or resisting only delayed the inevitable. His own growth, his own healing, his own awakening. And in this space, he begins to choose differently. Not because she's waiting, but because she's not. Not because she's holding space, but because she's reclaimed it for herself. And in that absence, he feels the call to rise, to align, to meet her, not as the runner or the avoider, but as the man his soul always knew he could be. When the divine feminine decides she's done, it doesn't mark the end of the journey. It marks a new beginning, a shift that realigns not just the connection, but both souls individually. Because when she steps back, when she reclaims her energy, when she stops waiting and starts living, the path forward changes for both of them. Have you ever felt that moment when your decision to choose yourself felt like the start of a completely new chapter? For the divine feminine, this path is no longer about holding space, waiting for his awakening, or pouring energy into a dynamic that wasn't balanced. It's about walking her own journey, about anchoring into her own truth, her own wholeness, her own sovereignty. She realizes that true love cannot flourish in imbalance, and that holding space for someone else's growth at the cost of her own is not the path to union. It's the path to depletion. So she chooses herself, not with anger or bitterness, but with love. Love for herself, love for the connection, love for the divine masculine's right to choose his own path. And this choice liberates her. Have you noticed how, when you stop waiting, you actually open the door for real connection on your terms? This shift doesn't mean she stops loving him. It means she stops waiting for him to choose love. She recognizes that her life, her light, her growth don't depend on his readiness. And this realization is magnetic. Her energy becomes clear, aligned, radiant. She's no longer chasing or hoping, she's being. And in that being, something profound happens. The divine masculine feels the shift. He senses the change in her energy, the withdrawal of the space she once held. At first, it might feel like loss, like absence, like rejection. But as the dust settles, he begins to understand that this shift is not about him, it's about her. Her choosing herself forces him to confront his own truth, his own readiness, his own fears. Have you ever felt that the silence someone leaves behind isn't emptiness, but an invitation to rise? For him, the path forward becomes clear. Stay where he is, clinging to old patterns, or step into alignment. Choose fear or choose growth. Hide behind excuses or embrace the truth. The space she's created isn't a punishment, it's a mirror. A reflection of what's possible if he's willing to step into his own awakening. For both the divine feminine and divine masculine, this new path is about self-responsibility. It's about understanding that union doesn't happen through waiting or chasing. It happens through alignment, through choosing truth over comfort, through embracing the journey within, even when the other isn't ready. It's a path of becoming, of rising, of returning to the self. Have you ever felt that real love isn't about waiting, but about becoming? When the divine feminine is done and the divine masculine feels the shift, the connection has a chance to reset, not through external action, but through inner transformation. If he chooses to align, the reunion won't be based on need or desperation. It will be based on two souls meeting as equals. If he doesn't, she's already whole, already walking her path, already free. This is the power of the new path. It's not about loss. It's about liberation. It's not about silence. It's about clarity. It's not about endings. It's about beginnings. For her, for him, for the connection itself. There's a quiet truth that emerges when the divine feminine finally decides she's done. A shift that doesn't announce itself with fireworks or declarations, but with a deep, soul-level knowing. I am whole. I am enough. I am complete, whether you choose to join me or not. Have you ever felt that profound moment when you realize that waiting isn't love? It's self-abandonment. This is where true union begins, not in the clinging, the hoping, the chasing, but in the stillness of being. The divine feminine's choice to be done is not a rejection of the divine masculine. It's an invitation for both to rise. For her, it's an act of sovereignty. For him, it's a call to awaken. For the connection, it's the beginning of a new dynamic, one rooted not in need, but in truth. As she stands in her wholeness, her energy becomes magnetic, not because she's calling him back, but because she no longer needs to. Her presence, her light, her alignment send a silent message. I'm here, in truth. You're welcome to meet me, but only in alignment. Have you noticed how, when you let go of needing something, you become a beacon for it to come naturally? For the divine masculine, this realization is both liberating and confronting. He begins to see that the space she created isn't a punishment, it's a mirror, a reflection of the work he has yet to do. A gentle but firm toward his own wholeness. And in that space, he faces a choice. Stay in the old patterns of fear and avoidance, or step into his truth. Remain the runner, or become the awakened counterpart. This isn't an easy path. It demands courage. It requires him to face the shadows he's long avoided, to stop looking for external validation and start listening to his own soul's call, to recognize that the love he seeks from her is, at its core, a reflection of the love he must cultivate within himself. Have you ever realized that the most powerful love is the one that doesn't bind, but liberates? That's the truth the divine feminine's decision reveals. She's not done with him. She's done with the dynamic that keeps both of them stuck. She's done waiting for alignment to come from him. She's choosing alignment within herself, and in doing so, she sets both of them free. If he chooses to rise, to align, to step into his truth, the connection can reset, not as a return to old patterns, but as a meeting of two whole souls, each standing in their own power. A reunion that isn't built on filling gaps or healing wounds, but on celebrating the fullness of each. A love that isn't desperate or conditional, but expansive and true. If he doesn't choose, she's already whole, already walking her path, already living the life her soul came here to live. Because true union isn't about waiting for someone to catch up. It's about becoming so aligned with your own truth that you create the space for others to rise if they choose. Have you felt that moment of deep release, where you stop waiting and start living? This is the final message. True union is born not from need, but from wholeness, not from clinging, but from letting go, not from waiting, but from walking your path in truth, in love, in light. And when both souls reach that place, whether together or apart, the connection doesn't just continue, it transforms. It becomes something higher, deeper, truer, a sacred dance of two whole beings, choosing each other, not because they need to, but because they want to. Have you reached this moment of wholeness? Comment, "I stand in my truth," and let your light inspire others.